DeFi really has no answer for this right now. One goal that we have with DYAD right now, it's building things that will suck in that non-DeFi inflow.
It wouldn't be a true DYAD episode if you weren't dumping heaps of information on us. I was waiting for this.
We're designing DYAD in a way that the more aligned you are and the more work you're willing to do with understanding the protocol, the greater upside you can realize, and that you can build meme coin-like things on something that starts and maintains a core that's much more on the right curve. Capital formation for entities that aren't already in DeFi, that they just want the best rate and the best terms on a loan for something in the real world. That's a giant percentage of all activity in finance, period.
Maybe there'll be a part 3. Who knows, when you guys are providing the infrastructure for my mortgage.
Holy shit. Guys, that intro was amazing. This is actually the first time I've seen it. Congrats. That is really beautiful.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. Recording comes out.
Yeah, that is one of the best parts of the show, definitely. Big change from last time, that's for sure.
All downhill from here.
Welcome back, everyone. Episode 88 this week. Another lovely Tuesday. This week we have a very special guest. We're welcoming back Joey again from DYAD. Joey, appreciate you coming on again. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. I know that you guys don't typically do this, but there's a lot of new things that are happening around DYAD, and there's no place I'd rather describe a lot of it and sort of discuss it for the first time publicly than with you two. So thank you.
Yeah, it means a lot to us, man. We had this conversation I don't know, maybe like 2-3 weeks ago about like having you on again, I think, because it's not something we've done before, obviously. What's funny is like whenever me and Cedo have like conversations with, marketing agencies, new potential guests, whoever, like whenever we're telling the Exit Liquidity story, the first like DYAD episode is pretty consistently a reference we make. Like up and coming team, building something very novel, very new. And like, just like in the arena, like genuinely trying something. So like that played a big role here. And obviously, the traction you guys have seen over the last couple weeks, last couple months has been pretty insane. Definitely well deserved. So I think we have a lot to catch up on for sure. Last time you were on, we did the whole Exit Liquidity story as we usually do. I believe last time we talked about like Ohm forks and Wonderland. I think that was your Exit Liquidity moment.
Yeah.
And since this is like a second episode and we've never, like, it's a tradition, we have to start Exit Liquidity with an Exit Liquidity moment. So I'm going to have to ask you for a non-Ohm fork related Exit Liquidity moment before we get into this.
Other Exit Liquidity moment I had was actually the origin of Solidly on Phantom way back before that was really a known thing. So I remember very clearly getting on that. It was Twitter then, actually, the Twitter space with Andre and Daniele, and there was like thousands of listeners or whatever. They were starting to talk about what this Solidly thing was. What is a VE NFT? What is all this shit? And I was excited. I was like kind of discovered Phantom through that space. Basically, I didn't know Phantom was a thing before. Which, yeah, I was probably like that carpetbagger tourist that like a lot of the Phantom people resented coming in after that space, right? But the sort of the description of the Solidly design, I could say the way they describe VE NFTs and just wrapping a sort of position like that in an NFT, which was a evolution from the curve model where you basically had the lock associated with your EOA and you couldn't transfer it. So you had this kind of hacked together liquid wrapper thing, but to wrap it in NFT that I would say is a direct line to the notes, the DYAD NFTs that we have now as a fundamental part of the system. But yeah, I mean, to get back to the exit liquidity story, it's a pretty famous story within this, pretty small community still. But Andre kind of made the curve for emissions too aggressive after the first like week and change. The emissions were way down. The whole thing kind of like started to go off the rails, and that's when Andre did his. Or I don't think it was Andre. It was like one of his boys like wrote Andre's quitting DeFi, and so Yearn and every Andre associated thing just super retraced. And yeah, at that point, I was kind of definitely some exit liquidity for somebody. I think maybe what was that guy's name on Phantom? Oh, so this is an interesting part of the story. So there's this one dude, I forgot exactly what his name was, but the way that Solidly was designed, you could basically incentivize any pair, even if like it was kind of a fake pair of two fake ERC20s. So this guy made this pair on Phantom called like Batman, Spider-Man, or something like this. And he somehow just directed all the Solidly missions, like starting the second week, to this fake pair that he was the only holder of the LP, and kind of like broke the solidly system basically. So I think that combined with the emissions curve just kind of spoiled the vibe on Phantom for a while. And then this is before the bridge hack. And this is not fighting Phantom. I'm excited to see all the Sonic stuff happening. I'm following that a little bit. But at this era, that was very much like an exit liquidity experience that I had. What's interesting is that solidly model became Velodrome and Aerodrome, which are, the biggest dexes on Optimism and Base right now. I was on a space with Alexander from there a little while ago, and I think it's actually interesting. That's one of the only like the fork of the original thing was the one that captured the actual market for the product. But yeah, that was pretty much my non-ohm fork exit liquidity story in terms of one that actually led to and inspired what we ended up building over DYAD.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're due for more like solidly to like velodrome or aerodrome pipelines in the near future.
Mm,
Kind of off topic, but like with what happened with like Frentech, what I feel like is happening now with like Pump Fun and like all these other different failed paradigm experiments. It's like failed successes with good learnings that like someone else can take and apply. Like solidly was the best example we've had so far of that, and I
yeah,
think we're definitely due to see quite a bit more. Um,
yeah, and we
that
are
would certainly be exciting.
extremely,
Uh,
extremely aware of what you just described at DYAD. So what we are kind of thinking of
yeah,
constantly is what would a fork of our fundamental mechanism, or what parts of the mechanism would they change? What would they add? What would they eliminate in order to end run us and pull like a velodrome aerodrome? Now, I think that it's the fork game is still really difficult unless you have like an Andre or a Racer at the helm. And I would like to think, and I kind of work daily in my like self-care and sort of just stabilization of all the crazy stuff that can happen to DeFi founder, to not go down that path and not expose DYAD to that risk. And also to not ever have DYAD be like about me
mhm,
in the way that those other projects were about their founders. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that we pay close attention to. I think that there has to be some level of own goal for a fork to really dominate in the way that we saw. But it's always the
yep,
history does repeat, but it also does new stuff. So we're aware of that.
yep, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're gonna continue to see a lot of that. I think it's good to see it in early stages.
When it comes to deciding on a second episode, we really wanted to get some kind of new information and some updates on that. So this is like a first exit liquidity part two moment, and I do kind of want to explain uh, that in the history of that to a lot of people and to a lot of protocols who might ask for a second episode. Like this is a rarity. So we were talking about kind of dyad. Can you sum up a bit actually on what has changed from the last episode until now? I guess we weren't live, we were still in testing phase at the last episode, but kind of summarize the journey so far, what you felt like just worked, maybe some anecdotes on what it's like being a founder in DeFi.
Yeah, for sure. That's right. When we did the first episode, DYAD was completely pre-traction. I think it was we had the notes, the NFTs, and people had minted those pretty vigorously. But it was before LBP. It was before any the DYAD stablecoin was even live, and it was still very theoretical. This idea that you could solve the scalability issue of the CDP stablecoin design that relies on over collateralization in order to mitigate the volatility risk to the stablecoin's backing. Solve that by basically tokenizing that over collateralization buffer, basically the excess collateral, so TVL minus stablecoin circulating supply, tokenize that and use that as an incentive to get people to provide liquidity really cheaply, and to mint the stablecoin at maximum capital efficiency. That was totally unproven. So what we've seen over the time since that episode, since we launched, and also since like about the last 3 weeks, month ish, that we've really achieved a level of traction that is still very much at the beginning of our journey. Definitely not the level that we're remotely satisfied with, but a solid 10x above like the first 2 3 months of after we deployed, the level of like volume that we had on trading both kerosene and the DYAD stablecoin, the number of users, the TVL, all of these important metrics. So what we've found is that fundamentally, like the core idea that I just described, basically tokenize the over collateralization, use that token, which is kerosene, as an incentive to provide liquidity. That's a fundamentally good system. It helps DYAD scale without the protocol really needing to spend what a stablecoin would normally need to spend. I mean, we have like 33 million against USDC on UniV3 right now, which is obviously an early small stable coin, but getting there, we didn't have to work with any market makers or emit a crazy percentage of our token. And I think most importantly, the token secondary market price, kerosene, has not followed the typical farm token trajectory of people selling it as soon as they earn it. And that part of it, that sort of like allowing emissions of this token without that farm token like sell pressure, that's a function both of kerosene's utility, which I described. It basically lets you mint more DYAD against a given amount of exogenous collateral that you bring in. But it's also the notes again of the DYAD NFTs, the note based incentive mechanism that really is the core of our flywheel. And the adjustments and the changes that we're making to the protocol right now, that actually we finished the audit with Pashov today. So we're reviewing that and we're going to be deploying these changes really, really soon, are based on learnings since achieving that level of traction and seeing more volume basically and more TVL flow through the protocol. How do we both tighten and accelerate that flywheel of more people competing for kerosene, more people providing liquidity, actually has a positive effect on kerosene's deterministic value, which is that TVL minus DYAD circulating supply divided by kerosene tokens, and how that deterministic value has this sort of soft floor effect, excuse me, on the market price. And the market price really is just important because that is what people who are deciding to commit to this protocol see as yield on this USDC DYAD stable pair. So tightening this flywheel, really improving based on learnings we've had since traction, is what we're doing now. And then in the slightly longer term, but actively getting our cycles at this point, is sort of what we've grouped under this umbrella sDYAD, which is kind of borrowing from sDY, which is this lending protocol, this lending system where people can, whether they have a note NFT or not, deposit DYAD, kind of leave it there and just earn yield on it, like a very, very simple savings type of product that will be the next inflection point for our TVL and for the number of people we can reach, and really the next level of actual utility for DYAD outside of just a, a farming system that prints pretty well. So I'm happy to start with our learnings and like what specifically the changes we're making are to the flywheel, and then get into a more deep discussion of like what sDYAD will be. And that sDYAD discussion and sort of describing how that'll work, that will be true alpha. Like I really haven't talked about this with anybody outside of the team and advisors. So yeah, that's sort of the lay of the land. Do you guys want to proceed that way? Do you have any questions before that?
Yeah, just a few questions on this the flywheel mechanics. One of the critiques I'm sure you've gotten and kind of explaining dyad to someone always gets is that there are some like complexities that come for understanding how this mechanism works, and then it almost becomes like back of your hand. You understand what the mechanics are like, you can kind of understand what parties are going to do to kind of maintain this. Um, but when I always hear this like flywheel terminology, there's some positive connotations and also some negatives. I'm curious, like as you've like you're basically taking a bet on what you think people that you don't know their name, you don't know, what they're you don't know anything about them. You're trying to bet on what they're kind of going to do and how they're going to act.
Mhm.
And sometimes those flywheels are like a bit bumpy. They're not like a perfect flywheel. Has there been any of that? Have there been any like weird things that have happened in kind of in the expectations where things had to have been tweaked or changed, or anything you noticed?
Absolutely. So I'll give the biggest example, which is the main thing that's informing these changes that we're making that are being audited right now. So right now, the NFTs, the notes, first of all, you need a note in order to mint and burn dyad. So they kind of control access to the actual dyad circulating supply. Um, Notes earn something called XP, experience points, which technically it's an ERC20 token that has unlimited supply and it's bound to the NFTs, but you can just think of it as like a metadata trait of the NFTs, a dynamic metadata trait. So the more kerosene you deposit in your note, over time you earn more XP. So the equation right now is like a billionth of an XP per kerosene token per second. So that basically incentivizes when you earn kerosene not to dump it, but rather to deposit it so you earn more XP. And the value of XP, it's just a multiplier on your kerosene accrual from providing liquidity. So if you have like a lot of XP relative to everybody else, it's as if you're LPing with greater size in that pool than if you have like no XP. So that's basically the basic flywheel that basically the basic flywheel. That's the basic flywheel that got us to this level. We're starting to see that not so much like people have found a way to exploit it, but some of the top notes in terms of XP have just XP deposited as collateral. They've not minted any dyad and they haven't deposited any exogenous collateral. And yeah, technically, they're earning a shitload of XP. And I guess it's okay for the protocol because they're keeping all that kerosene out of the Uniswap pool and protecting the yield in a certain way. But we don't really want to be incentivizing that. It's not harming us, but it's not really that good. So the changes to XP are basically with a few other tweaks. Um, Two things. Number one, we're adding this concept of mileage. So mileage just is for every XP that a note ever earns, um, it earns a mileage point as well. And the higher a note's mileage, the slower it accumulates additional XP. So this is basically, think of it as like, I think mileage is a pretty good metaphor. It's like the more miles you have on a car, the less efficiently, I mean, yeah, technically 30,000 miles is a sweet spot for most engines that kind of like breaks in and it's really efficient then. But okay, let's say after 30K, you start to get more issues and it's just less efficient. So the more mileage a node has, the less efficiently it's going to accrue XP. Now, as long as you don't, so this is the other part of our flywheel now that I forgot to mention, it's pretty critical. If you withdraw kerosene, your XP on your node is slashed proportional to the amount that you had deposited versus the amount you withdrew. So let's say you have 1,000 XP and you have 100,000 kerosene deposited. If you withdraw 50,000 of that kerosene, your XP is slashed to 500 now. So that's sort of like the other. There's like the carrot and the stick. That's very much the stick. So we actually saw some interesting effects of this when kerosene pumped crazily. I still don't know why it did this, but it got to like 0.35 like 2 weeks ago. You can look on the chart. A number of node holders sold, right? Obviously. But by selling, they greatly deflated the overall supply of XP because they had to rip it out of their nodes. Their XP got slashed, and a lot of people who didn't sell actually moved up the XP leaderboard by doing nothing other than not selling. So that XP slashing for withdrawing kerosene, that's another critical part of the flywheel. So what we're changing though, so mileage basically, so one of the issues other than just giving XP for kerosene deposited, which leads to these weird notes where it's like just kerosene in there, they're not minting DYAD, they're not contributing to TVL. Notes that are really early or also have a lot of kerosene in them, like some of these notes that I mentioned that are just kerosene, they're starting to achieve a percentage of kerosene. Like the top node has 17% of all, or sorry, a level of XP. The top node has 17% of all XP, which is a lot. And it starts to get discouraging for new people to enter because these nodes can kind of achieve this escape velocity and it becomes kind of ridiculously expensive in terms of the amount of kerosene you have to buy to put into the note or the amount you have to put into the liquidity pool to earn the kerosene or both to actually start to catch up to these notes. So those two things, the only giving XP for kerosene deposited and this escape velocity issue where certain notes can, just kind of get to a point that are really, really hard to compete with and thus discourage new entrants into the protocol. Those two things are what we're solving with the new mechanism. So let me get back to mileage. So mileage, as you can probably guess, is primarily aimed at solving this escape velocity issue. So as you earn, for every XP that you earn, the node accumulates mileage. The more mileage you have, the less efficiently you start accumulating XP. And if you go on the DYAD Discord, we've pinned a calculator that I made that you can make a copy of. It simulates this really cleanly. The thing to keep in mind with this is if you don't withdraw your kerosene or you don't withdraw a lot of kerosene, you will be able to, the system's designed so that you can outrun the downward effect of your mileage. So if you stay in and you basically deposit all of the kerosene that you earn or that you buy, your amount of XP you'll get from that and sort of the accumulation of the XP over time will outrun the effect of the mileage on accumulating less XP as you get more and more mileage. So it strongly incentivizes you to not withdraw, even more strongly than before, because think about it. If you withdraw kerosene and you get slashed, now you have less XP, but that mileage doesn't get slashed. So you're kind of left with this like higher mileage than XP note, which people have kind of made references to like for the streets type notes on the Discord. But it's like this note now will essentially go for a discount because it is so ran through. It's like high mileage with very low XP relatively. And you don't want to be in that position because now your note might be worth less than the floor price of like a fresh note with no XP and no mileage, which is fine. If you want to do that, there will be a buyer for that note, but it will probably sell at a discount. So the mileage is mainly to more strongly disincentivize withdrawing kerosene. You can still do it. I'm very anti-lock. I think locks are sort of an old tech, but it's a strong disincentive to withdraw kerosene. It makes entering into the system more equitable without really veering into like communist mechanisms, like you get to a certain point and you stop earning XP, or like everyone's XP is just slashed at a certain point. It's still based on your behavior, and if you commit to not withdrawing kerosene, you will outrun your mileage, and you will be dominant, just not so dominant that it's not competitive anymore. And then the second part of this is we are rewarding kerosene or rewarding XP not just for kerosene deposited, but also for your DYAD minted balance. So the amount of DYAD debt you carry on your note over time also earns you XP, similarly to the way that kerosene earns you XP. So there's sort of a relationship here where the marginal boost that you get for the DYAD minted depends on the ratio of kerosene to DYAD minted, which basically means if kerosene is trading above $1 at some point, far above $1, you'll never be able to just mint a ton of DYAD, which will always basically cost $1 in terms of debt, and forget about kerosene. You still need to maintain a pretty healthy ratio between kerosene and DYAD debt. But it can give you up to like a 2x bonus. So every DYAD minted that you have, or every unit of DYAD debt per kerosene that you have, basically doubles the amount of kerosene in terms of earning XP for you. So this does two things. Number one, it makes those notes that are just stacking kerosene and not depositing any exogenous collateral, not minting any DYAD, they're going to be at a total disadvantage. They could still run that strategy, but it'll be up to 2x less efficient. And then it also directly incentivizes TVL without actually directly incentivizing TVL. So let me break this down because this is pretty specific to DYAD. If we rewarded XP for like how much ETH or wrap staked ETH you deposited over time, what would happen is people would just put a ton of exogenous collateral and basically stake their ETH or wrap staked ETH in DYAD. TVL would go up, but collateralization ratio of the overall protocol would also go up. That TVL would not be supporting DYAD debt. We want to grow the TVL, but we want to grow the DYAD debt as well at the same time, because in order to withdraw that collateral that you put in, if it's supporting DYAD debt, you also need to burn DYAD stablecoins. And that makes the deterministic value of kerosene just less volatile. Because remember, kerosene deterministic value is TVL minus DYAD supply divided by kerosene supply. So if we just incentivize TVL directly and that goes way up, that's like very soft TVL. Whoever deposited it could just withdraw it at any point without having to burn DYAD. If we incentivize your DYAD debt, we are incentivizing TVL because you have to bring in collateral to mint that DYAD, but you also have to burn DYAD to withdraw that exogenous collateral. So that makes that equation, the TVL minus DYAD supply. If the DYAD supply is going down in order for TVL to go down, the kerosene deterministic value is just more stable, and that makes kerosene more useful as this kind of pseudo endogenous collateral. So I just dropped a lot on you guys. Let me stop. I could just keep going. Hit me with questions about what I just described.
It wouldn't be a true diet episode if you weren't dumping heaps of information on us. I was waiting for this.
I think one good way to kind of explain this is if you could walk us through probably the new entrant into the DYAD ecosystem and kind of, in your opinion, or for the benefit of the protocol, the incentives or the mechanisms that are turning that person into the person that you want them to be for the benefit of the protocol, what that looked like before this like update, what it looked like after, and then kind of like what is being disincentivized in that process. I think we got a little bit of it, or we got all of it, but I think to kind of put it down into how the user is going to interact with the protocol after this kind of update and these mechanisms go into place.
Absolutely, absolutely. So right now, we're using a third-party reward distributor built to distribute rewards for concentrated liquidity Uni v3 pools called Merkle. And this is sort of a side project from Angle Protocol, which is a euro-denominated stablecoin. And Merkle's been excellent in terms of getting us off the ground, getting us to the TVL and the liquidity we have right now. We're starting to outgrow it in a way, and we not even outgrow it, but because of XP and all these mechanics that I just described, we need something that is just more custom. So the first part of this is we are replacing Merkle with our own kerosene dispenser, which is going to sort of handle looking at a note's XP and basically boost their reward just as the product of LP size and XP that they have. Very, very simple math. All on chain as well. Merkle does a lot of their calculations off chain, which for our UI and just sort of people trying to figure out how much XP gives them what APR has been problematic. So that's number one. Because right now, when you enter the protocol, you don't even need a note in order to farm USDC DYAD. And this has been sort of a frustration where if you are a mainnet whale, of which a number have come into our protocol, you might not even have the time, or it might not even be worth it for you to go onto our Discord or read our docs and figure out what the hell a note is, why get an NFT, why buy some fairly illiquid token, like what is all this kerosene and everything. I just see this base level, 20% on a stable pair on mainnet with 30 million liquidity already. I'm going to jump in and just go. So there's a type of user right now who doesn't have a note, who probably doesn't really. I'm not saying they can't understand DYAD. I'm sure these whales are fairly smart, but they don't have the time to, or it's just not worth it for them. And they can farm, and they tend to sell when they farm. It's typical like farm token stuff. So that's been okay. I mean, it's definitely helped us build the liquidity, but I feel like at this point, we really want kerosene to go to those who are going to use it as backing collateral for DYAD. I mean, that's the purpose of it. We want DYAD to be this maximally capital efficient stablecoin. So change number one from now, where you don't actually need a note, you'll be much more efficient with a note. But if you have, $7 million to LP, maybe it doesn't matter to you. That's going to change. You'll only be able to accumulate kerosene from farming if you have a note and if you have some XP. Because XP, if it's zero, you get zero. So that's the change number one. Change number two, like I said, right now, you don't actually need to mint any DYAD, even if you have a note and you have kerosene and you're depositing the kerosene in your note to build up the note's XP. You don't need to mint any DYAD with it. You could just buy DYAD by swapping some USDC for DYAD and then LP. And you can earn kerosene that way. And the top notes, or one of the top notes, is doing that. And again, that's not harming us. You could make the argument that they are benefiting us, and so they do deserve to get that kerosene. But I don't really see that as long-term aligned with what we're doing. So again, it's not like nobody's figured out a way to exploit us. Like, we work very hard to close off those attack surfaces. None of this is an attack. It's just suboptimal behavior. So that change of incentivizing DYAD debt over time and carrying DYAD debt, as well as depositing kerosene, that will make that strategy of just stacking a note with kerosene to earn XP and not doing anything else with it a lot less efficient, because we'll be competing with notes that are maxing their kerosene deposits as well as their DYAD debt, and kind of compounding that through XP, LPing aggressively. And yeah, it'll basically make the optimal strategy to be deposit exogenous collateral, mint DYAD against it, LP, earn kerosene goes in the note, earn XP, you use that kerosene to mint more DYAD, add that to the LP, and just rinse and repeat, and just kind of build your XP, build your kerosene. And really, if you need to withdraw, that's fine, but there's pretty substantial value destruction when you do, in the form of XP slashing and in the form of your note's mileage being higher than the amount of XP that it has. Did that answer your question? I know maybe you're asking for more of like a user journey kind of thing, But I feel like those are the main like compare and contrast things right now.
Yeah, no, that
No,
was
I think it
perfect.
makes sense. I think in my mind, like the most salient point about any like complex stablecoin design is that any end user can just go and hold those stable coins. Like that is the most like bare bones type of user. And when you're comparing to stuff like DAI or USDC or USDT or, you know, these incumbents, the like if you're the type of person who's in crypto for like, you know, reasons why we're all in here, permissionlessness, decentralization, you know, disintermediating these processes, then like that's super powerful in and of itself. And then like I remember um I always tell people I don't watch podcasts even though I do one, which is true. I don't. I watched our last one. That was an exception to this, and I remember um you said uh you had a line where it was like the point of most of finance is just to match demand for liquidity with supply, with people willing
Yes.
to supply it.
Yes.
And like the flywheel, like if you zoom out, is like that is the whole point here. And you have these different actors that can take advantage of you know, that can take advantage of kerosene or the notes plus XP in some sort of way. But like you zoom out far enough, that's all that's happening really is you have people who can hold the stable coin, and then you have complex parties who in different ways can, you know, profit in their own way, um, take on more capital efficient loans, all that type of stuff. Everything is still like around that like center mission though, regardless of kind of the more complex things get, how the stuff you add onto the flywheel, the I can still see that like that vision is still very clearly at the center of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll add to that that we're designing DYAD in a way that the more aligned you are and the more work you're willing to do with understanding the protocol, and kind of being more manual with optimizing your position, the greater upside you can realize. And really what that really means is the larger spread you can capture from the supply of liquidity and the demand for the stablecoin. And this kind of gets at the heart of the lending layer that we're kind of building more long term as sDYAD, but also into, and I'll describe this really quickly. Something we're doing much more short term to allow wider participation in DYAD and TVL inflow, basically from a much wider group of users than people who'd be interested in listening to the last 10 minutes of this and trying to understand like how can I optimize my position from it. Because again, I don't want to say that it's like an IQ filter, because I think there are a lot of very smart people who for whatever reason aren't going to take the time for this. But it definitely, the not just the complexity but the level of commitment it takes to purchase a note, understand the best way to get it to work. There is a learning curve with this base layer core part of DYAD right now. And that is fairly intentional. I mean, if you go on our Discord, the people who are attracted to this, the community that's been built, the level of discussion that happens there, and really the quality of both like user and also user slash contributor. I mean, we have users who are not team members but have built really, really useful tools for like looking at which notes are closest to liquidation, automatic liquidation bots that we're kind of working into parts of the protocol now. Our second dev who we hired, Coffee, actually came in as a note holder and a community member. So there, for a small like beginning stage protocol, I think that starting sort of on the Gigabrain Wojak side of the curve and really focusing on that and meeting that user's desires and talking with them on that level and building something that's interesting and captures their attention creates the foundation for making something that has a much wider addressable market as you build up from there. I think it's really hard to go the other way. Like, you're not going to find a meme coin that develops into a sort of groundbreaking DeFi protocol necessarily. But I think that you can build meme coin like things that have that same wide appeal and accessibility on something that starts and retains a core that's much more like on the right curve. So that's sort of the high level way that we think about this. Like everything I just described, notes, XP, all of this, it's never intended to directly address a wider market. Like my parents are never going to own a note. That's not really what they're for. But my parents could absolutely earn yield from DYAD by parking their stablecoin in a vault, and it just earns yield for them. And it is flowing through notes, and notes are capturing a nice piece of that spread. But all you have to do as a more retail user is swap some USDC for DYAD and park it in a vault. And the longer you're in there, the more your position ramps up, the more yield you're entitled to. It is gamified in an XP like way, just in a much more simple fashion. So that's the vision for scaling DYAD, more or less. It's like we're not trying to make the base layer more accessible. We are building things on top of that base layer that are only really possible with the base layer that we have right now, that will draw in much, much, much wider inflow than really we could ever have there. And I'll just leave it, this part of it, with I'm very skeptical that DeFi, as we think of it, of having like a Rabby wallet and going on weird discords and trying to construct strategies of like getting some percentage here, doing a loop leverage there, and then getting some other coin, locking it up in a contract, and taking the liquid wrapper and whatever. That that has, I think, largely reached like the people who it's going to reach at this point. I think maybe there's some room for it to grow, but people who are into it are the people who are into it. It is a niche thing, and I'm super into it, and I mostly interact with other people who are into it. But for DeFi to reach its real potential, which I think is complete takeover of the world financial system, we need to start thinking of that as like a base layer, and get sort of obsessed with like how do you bring in flow that doesn't require that level of interest in the base layer. So just high level, that's what we're thinking of.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you even like alluded a little bit to community building in that process, or at least like at this early stage. I was definitely curious to hear about that because I mean, for like the mind share that Dyad has, like among my circles at least, which is I consider to be like DeFi builders slash crypto natives, like people who kind of straddle that line. It's much higher than it lets on socials or in a community sense. But to hear that you guys are kind of focused on really onboarding, like the more onboarding, conversing with, and just like, in some cases even bringing them on your team, bringing them as a contributor. um I love that approach, like staying sort of more niche, being more on a person to person basis. It makes a ton of sense, and it clearly seems to be working. I do want to spend a good bit of time talking about sDYAD because you've alluded to that a couple times. You mentioned it to us a couple weeks ago. Would love to just get like a rundown of what you guys are thinking about there, where your head's at with that.
Definitely, definitely. So I'll sort of give an overview, and we can dive down into any specific part of this. sDYAD is very much a work in progress, I'll say. So some of this, kind of like what DYAD was when we did our first episode, a lot has changed since then. We've learned a lot, modified, but the basic idea is there, and just sort of improved how we execute it. So similar thing right now with sDYAD. Basically, sDYAD starts from the premise, the theory that lending in DeFi is completely dominated by margin lending. Aave, Compound, whatever. It's basically you have collateral, you take out a loan against the collateral at some LTV, and then if the value of the collateral goes down, you get liquidated, or you have to add more to it, or you have to pay back some of the debt. DYAD as a CDP at the base layer is essentially that. It's a margin loan. In normal finance, margin lending is popular with like traders who want leverage, but it doesn't really work or meet the needs of businesses or just individuals who want to access some capital. Because if you can kind of like imagine like a mortgage, for example, if the lender, whoever's holding your mortgage, could look on Zillow and be like, "Oh, look, your house that we gave you a loan on just dropped like 500K. You need to, margin call. You need to give us some money, or we're foreclosing." Obviously, that's not a viable product. Nobody would want to use that. Ditto with like businesses that are in the process of capital formation, unless you have basically like a trading desk, somebody monitoring the health of like a loan on Ava or whatever, you can't really dedicate the resources to babysitting a margin loan if you just want to buy some like a coffee roaster for your cafe or whatever, and you want to borrow capital to do it, and you want to collateralize it with the value of the coffee roaster. So DeFi really has no answer for this right now. Like, there's been attempts at fixed rate lending. There's been attempts like there's another. I wasn't actually Exit Liquidity with this, but it definitely was an Exit Liquidity story. Maple Finance and the Ethiopian scooter shop. I'm sure you guys have heard about this one. Yeah, so it's like there have definitely been like attempts at this kind of thing, right? I think the main issue is, and this kind of gets back to what we were just saying, like the people who are in DeFi right now, they are very well served by margin lending. I don't really think that like DeFi natives need fixed rate mortgage like loans, because they're mainly using lending for leverage of some kind. Um, the real PMF for fully on chain DeFi fixed rate lending would be capital formation for entities that aren't already in DeFi, that they just want the best rate and the best terms on a loan for something in the real world. And that is a huge market. Like, that's a giant percentage of all activity in finance, period. So sDYAD is sort of the first step to creating fixed rate lending fully on chain in DeFi that doesn't need to fall back on like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or credit scores, or these other things that sort of make this type of collateralized fixed rate lending work in the real world. And the challenge for DeFi fixed rate lending, and I want to be clear, like you can have like Ava, I think, has fixed rate loans. Like you can build that easily, but it still can get margin called. Like if the collateral goes down to a certain point, you can get liquidated. So where the opportunity really lies is building a system where, as long as the borrower is making the agreed upon payments, there is no liquidation, regardless of what happens to the value of their underlying collateral. And that's a difficult thing to solve. But because of the way the notes operate, because of our flywheel, and because of the capital efficiency advantage that kerosene conveys to the notes that have a lot of kerosene, it's very possible. And it's really only possible building it over a stablecoin like DYAD. So that is essentially what sDYAD will be. It will be lending DYAD to borrowers with a fixed rate, either streamed using sDYAD, which is an awesome streaming protocol, or like weekly or monthly. It can be flexible there. And as long as the payments are being made, the loan is healthy. If the payments stop, the loan gets liquidated. But that's really the only determinant of a liquidation. Like, the oracle on the underlying collateral is checked once at origination, and after that, the loan is essentially deterministic. It's just proceeds based on the amortization schedule, and it kind of looks like a mortgage at that point. So yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing. And I want to be clear, this is a longer term project. I would say that the work going into this is equivalent, if not greater, than the work we put into the base layer. We have kind of earlier versions, like there will be an sDYAD vault before we have this lending layer deployed. That'll mainly be like a liquidation bot that earns yield from liquidating positions really efficiently. You add your DYAD to it. It's kind of like the liquidity stability pool in that case. But the real vision for sDYAD, for putting your DYAD in a vault, is that it will be lent out in this way. So I'm happy to get into the nitty gritty of how exactly we're pulling this off, how basically it creates a positive carry trade for notes, and the kind of spread on that carry trade is very much dependent on their amount of XP and kerosene. But yeah, before we get into that, just from sort of a product standpoint, happy to discuss like why fixed rate, why now, how we're thinking about this.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think what's funny and what I'm like immediately thinking is like, wow, Joey really just enjoys solving very complex problems in like the stablecoin world. And so I always like so for this goal, how does this fit into the broader puzzle? Like, how does this fit into the broader vision for DYAD? Because in my mind, and I feel like in other iterations of stablecoins, part of the like roadmap was always like, okay, get this stable coin on this lending protocol or on this exchange or in this place and just get people mixing around with it. I think what you're saying is that most of dollar use in the world in other countries revolves around lending and borrowing. And so you're trying to create this better version of on-chain lending and borrowing as a strategy to increase use of the stablecoin. Do I have that correct?
That's exactly right. And yeah, you called out something that I think is really important here. So yes, I do really love solving difficult problems, but it's also like I always think about where do I have an edge, right? I'm not like there are a lot of people in crypto who are like carnival barker types. Like they will hype up their project, they will do all that shit that I really am not, number one, not good at and have no interest in spending time at. So I feel like my edge is, first of all, building a team of people who feel similarly and are good at building stuff, and identifying things that design edge will really confer an advantage. So decentralized stablecoins, CDP stablecoins, that's why we did it that way with DYAD. I think lending is a similar thing. If I were going to fork Ava on top of DYAD and maybe give some kind of bonus based on XP or whatever, I don't think there's any meaningful way we could get usage for that other than me like paying KOLs or whatever. That's just shit that I don't want to do. I think that Ava owns margin lending on in DeFi. I think that there's some other interesting protocols coming out. Like shout out to Michael at Euler. I think Euler's doing incredibly interesting stuff. I feel like in order to stand out, lending is, believe it or not, even more crowded than stablecoins. It has to be radically different. It has to solve a completely unmet need. And so that's why we're taking this direction.
Yeah. I think like it's kind of tough for me to wrap my head around at first just because like it makes sense. A lot of it is still super early, that being said. And it's just, the issues we face with this stuff in, if you want to call it like the first generation of this, which is like, your maples, goldfinches, whatever that was.
Yeah.
Um they just felt like very rudimentary issues, like you get margin called in a scooter and who's gonna go and get
Yeah,
it.
totally.
Um
I think maple and like
it's
that
I
screw
think
square is
the
a really good kind of like metaphor for the whole
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, just like the bridge of having to cross that between on-chain like trustlessness and like, having actual real world assets. But and what I'm like understanding here is essentially that it's the capital efficiency is the unlock. That's what is serving as the bridge. That's what's making it possible, and like, not making it necessary to have to trust someone to
That's right.
go and, yeah.
It's also, I want to be really, really clear. So Maple and Goldfinch, they were trying to do stuff that DYAD will never try to do as a protocol. Maybe people will try to do it using DYAD as the capital formation tool, but DYAD is never going to be directly engaging with like off-chain borrowers and evaluating creditworthiness and making decisions. I mean, absolutely not. What we're doing is basically creating a framework for fixed rate capital formation through lending and using DYAD as the stablecoin that I don't know, a fintech that wants to lend to scooter companies, they could use DYAD to do it, but they're just another EOA in our system. We're never directly lending to off-chain entities. It will always be a permissionless DeFi protocol. We're just creating a tool for basically formation of this type of loan with just way better rates and terms than you'd be able to get with TradFi. And that's the edge. So I think the question, let me answer exactly the mechanical question here. So how does this work? How can you do this? So basically, there's three participants in one of these loans. There's the lender, the borrower, and the note. So the note, so let's start with the lender. The lender is a depositor to a DYAD pool, right? You have some DYAD, you deposit it, and you earn a yield back. And that's really all the lender needs to think about. They're not evaluating individual loans. They're not making any decisions. They're just providing DYAD to a vault. The borrower has basically borrows DYAD from that vault. And then they are collateralizing it with some kind of exogenous collateral, ETH, one of the DYAD whitelisted backing collaterals. And they're actually paying the interest denominated in that collateral at a fixed rate. So this is important. They're borrowing stablecoin, they're borrowing DYAD, and they are paying for the loan in like a fixed stream of ETH, for example. And the size of that stream is insensitive to ETH price action. Now, the connection between these two is the note. So notes basically can play this role where they get the ETH or the wrap staked ETH, whatever volatile collateral they're using, deposited in their note in exchange for adding the DYAD debt that needs to be paid or the DYAD that needs to be paid to the lenders onto their notes DYAD debt balance, basically. So they're essentially minting DYAD, giving it to the lenders. So the lenders get DYAD as yield. The borrower pays, they get DYAD as their principal. They're paying for that loan in some kind of exogenous collateral. The note is getting that stream of exogenous collateral and paying with DYAD to the lenders. So it's this kind of three-way thing. But what this means for the note is, given the difference between the supply and the borrow, as well as ETH price action, they basically get access to this kind of carry trade where they're paying a fixed stream of DYAD or minting a fixed amount of DYAD to get a fixed stream in ETH terms of ETH coming into their note. And the greater their amount of kerosene, the greater cushion there is against that kind of like retrace of ETH to continue participating in this, and without cushioning or damping their upside exposure to it at all. So basically, the note and kind of like the way that notes can achieve capital efficiency, but you can really think of it as the more kerosene they have, the more insulated they are from ETH volatility or whatever collaterals coming in. As long as they continue to mint and supply that stream of DYAD to the lenders, they continue to get that stream of interest payment basically in the volatile collateral from to the lenders. They continue to get that stream of volatile collateral from the borrowers. So again, haven't even really built this in a way that we could launch a test net yet, but conceptually and sort of like the early designs, this is how it would work. And it would provide this extremely profitable carry trade for notes that have the amount of kerosene and ultimately XP in order to mitigate the risk of participating in it. So yeah, that's basically how we get it to work. Lenders get paid yield in the stablecoin that they supply. Borrowers get stablecoins against volatile collateral which is paid out as interest, and then the note is essentially this broker, you could think of them, taking in the volatile collateral, paying out to the lenders in minted DYAD.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's crazy. I think I kind of saw this in our first episode as well, and like now it's even more clear. Like a note holder with a like a line note holder with a good like XP and kerosene balance is going to be like a force to some extent. Like you can definitely afford a lot of benefits, a lot of privileges by like being in that position. Um yeah, I mean, I guess like I'd just be curious. I mean, you mentioned obviously this is something that you've specced out kind of mentally. You're not at a point to necessarily put this on testnet or anything like that yet, but where is it kind of on your priority list at the moment? Because everything obviously has been around perfecting the on-chain DYAD flywheel and getting that going. It feels like things are in a pretty good spot now.
Yeah, if we could describe, just to clarify before we jump past this, the stream payments. What kind of consistency would those look like in that hypothetical? Is it like how often are these exogenous collateral payments going uh, to
Yeah,
pay,
so
basically?
at the actual like on-chain level, we would want it to be a consistent stream. So like I said, sDYAD has probably the best protocol for streaming tokens from one address to another, and it could be EOAs or contracts or whatever. But you could create a user experience that is like a weekly payment, a monthly payment, whatever that is, and you'd just be batching that week stream or that month stream, if that's easier from a design standpoint. But at the on-chain layer, it would just be a constant stream, essentially.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut
Gotcha.
you off on the
Yeah.
priorities and
No, no,
that element.
that was a good question.
Yeah.
So yeah, on priorities, I'd say the way it usually goes is I'm my highest priority is always like biz dev, right? So always partnerships and talking about dyad, finding the best partners to sort of distribute our message and better describe our message, which is what I'm doing right now. Super high priority. The other super high priority for me is like designing the new stuff, and I do that with like my wife Jana, Shafu, Max, Coffee, and Aika, who are sort of like the team that kind of conceptualizes new things and bounces ideas off of each other. Um, and then once we have landed on something, we have a group in the Discord called Luminaries, which is like community members who've been with us for a long time. Some of them are angel investors, who we kind of bounce ideas off of in a more raw stage before talking about them more publicly. Um, Once it gets to the point where we're starting to write code, that starts to become like the dev priority. I continue with biz dev and move on to like designing the next stuff that we have to build, and even like identifying what should we be building, right? Like basic product research type stuff. For the devs, their priority is like kind of a step, like one step behind what that design and like biz dev and identifying roadmap priority is. So right now the devs are super like singularly prioritizing the audits and making changes for the audits for these flywheel updates that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, like the giving XP for carrying a dyad balance, mileage on notes, all of those things that we're finishing audits for and implementing, like deploying basically this week, I hope. And then, yeah, so it's like sDYAD right now, the fixed rate lending system I just described, that is my highest design priority. So right now with that group that I mentioned, um, when we talk and when we figure stuff out and when I'm doing like whiteboard stuff, it's all about refining and finding issues with and poking holes in and fixing those holes with that lending design that I just described to you. What I described, that sort of triangle, I don't want to say like triangle trade, that's fucked up, but you know what I'm saying, like the three participants and how the flow goes between them and how notes basically take on a lot of the risk, but given how far they've gotten in the system, can capture a crazy amount of upside, basically run your own Athena like carry trade is kind of what it ends up being. Um, that was like months of variations, simulations, different ideas, different ways to make this work. But like the months before that, we identified this basically opening in DeFi lending that was completely unexplored. And we did some research and kind of concluded or developed strong conviction that there would be a lot of demand for this, especially for non DeFi native users who can tap into the sort of credit formation, or not credit, sorry, capital formation that a system like this would provide without having to directly interact with the contracts on chain. So that sort of ties in actually like what the biz dev side of this is. So if we just built this and deployed it and had it as part of the DYAD UI, we wouldn't be reaching the users who are probably the best candidates for actually getting a lot of value from this and for driving adoption. So a lot of our biz dev right now is like finding and working with like the top sort of like vault strategy protocols, like Morpho, their earn vaults. We're talking with Morpho right now to make like depositing DYAD in a vault. They would actually deposit it on Morpho in one of their earn vaults curated by I don't know, Gauntlet or somebody. And that would just sweep those deposits into this sDYAD pool. On the borrower side, working with people like Holy Held and other companies like that that sort of straddle DeFi on chain with connections to off chain infra like the Swift system and Visa. Um, I don't want to reveal too much, but we're working on a really exciting consumer card product with Holy Held that would be sort of like the borrow side inflow into the system. So that's where like biz dev, it's so much more like if I was just going around trying to get random protocols to list DYAD, I feel like that would be a pretty bad use of my time and energy. It wouldn't really, maybe there'd be some more velocity on DYAD in the short term, but like we're just another stable coin among many. Like, are you going to use DYAD? Are you going to do this? And then do we have to pay people to use DYAD? Then it gets into this weird sort of like commodification of everything we build. So it's much more about like the everything justified by everything else. So like we're building this lending protocol. We identified it. So biz dev needs to be about how do we bring flow to both sides of that, the lenders and the borrowers, because ultimately that drives value to note holders and drives value to kerosene and drives value to participating in the flywheel and being aligned with the system that I described.
Yeah. Yeah, that's dope. I mean, integrating with these different these different rails and like more next generation like web 2 to web 3 type of Swift, Visa, Holy Held, all that stuff. That would be huge. I mean, that stuff is something we're all kind of waiting for, hoping for. Still, a lot of us are still isolated on chain, so to have like another thing that is also working to help bridge that is insane.
Yeah, like, I think about like where DeFi is right now. I think there is value to the kind of like enthusiast tuner culture that you see with like protocol designers and also users, where it's like guys who are obsessed with like wringing the most power out of like a motorcycle engine or whatever. Like that's cool. You can like get value out of that. Or like, I mean, here I'll show you like my desktop that I haven't turned on in a while. It's clearly like something that I worked on, right? And it's like, what are now I'm on my MacBook and that's what I really use now. It's like, what is the point of overclocking and doing exotic cooling and like trying to do that with a computer? It's kind of like justified by itself. It's really fun. And I think that DeFi right now is sort of in this like tuner mode. Like, how do I wring a couple more like points out of this or that? I think that that can be valuable. I mean, look at NVIDIA, right? Like that was kind of a company that was about gaming graphics cards, just super niche. And now, I mean, I'm not keeping up to date on it day to day, but like they're kind of like the hardware on which like AI is being built. So I think that DeFi is going to have that moment where it goes from like all of this tuning and all of this obsessive sort of like uh, enthusiast shit does provide a tremendous amount of value and has all been worth it. But you have to be oriented that way. You have to be thinking like, how do you get non-DeFi inflow into your shit? And that's, I'd say, if there's like one goal that we have with DYAD right now, it's building things that will suck in that non-DeFi inflow.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I'm loving like the trend we're seeing of people shifting over to that. I think a year ago, even like 6 months ago, it was something we weren't seeing much of at all, especially not last cycle. It was not only was it not really happening in a thoughtful or productive way, but when it was like it was almost like laughable the way it was happening. It was never really well thought out. Whereas now we have like the Dinero story is great. I think that's a really good example of the type of stuff we want to see. And like we're almost seeing that play out with you guys on a shorter time frame. Like you start off building this like niche autistic DeFi stuff and you just like own this pond of yours and then you expand from there to like actually providing products to people who may never need to or want to interact with DeFi in their own way. That's powerful. I think that's really huge.
Vision everyone talked about in DeFi, just like complexity underneath and, ease of use, kind of abstraction of all of that for the end user on the other side. And I think
Totally.
it's rarely being built towards in the way that I think you described. So this is
Well,
awesome.
first of all, yeah, shout out to Sammy and DeFi Dave and the rest of the Dinero Redacted crew. They're one of the big like inspirations, I'd say, for like not just product design, but also just building a team and a sort of vibe around a protocol and a set of products. I definitely look up to those guys. APX ETH coming soon as DYAD collateral, so that'll be a cool like first thing. But yeah, to your bigger point, I think especially for a stable coin, like you could have some other types of protocols that never really need to interact with the normal world or non DeFi flow, and be quite successful. Like I don't know, like um, Blur or whatever. I think that there you can build like very DeFi specific protocols that get big. But for a stable coin, especially, like we're ultimately out here to make a better form of money. And money isn't really money unless it's used by people for money stuff. So I'd say it's like part of our existential mission to keep the base layer radically DeFi, but bring in flow and build stuff that flow wants to come into, from well outside of DeFi. So I mean, even from the beginning, like that was very clear that we have to do this.
Yeah, that's really great to hear that it was, a part of things for so long and really excited to see it come through. I know we're a bit over time here so we can start to wrap up.
Yeah,
Maybe there'll be a part 3, who knows when you guys are
I didn't even realize
providing the infrastructure for my mortgage.
we've been on this call for over an hour. Damn, you guys are really good because sometimes I'm on a
Yeah.
call for like 15 minutes and I'm like, when is this gonna end? But I could just chat with you gentlemen for hours. So yeah, this was great. Thank you for having me on
I'm
again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure, man. Time flies. I mean, as we like to say, it takes 3 to tango, and, here we are.
No,
So,
exactly, right? Borrowers,
um
borrowers, lenders, and the note, right? It always
Yeah,
yeah,
that
yeah.
exactly.
tripod setup. Yeah.
That's that is for sure. Before we wrap up, I wanna give you a second, Joey, to speak directly to our audience for a second in case you have any closing remarks, calls to action for them. Now would be a great time to let the people know.
Yeah, look, Exit Liquidity audience, I feel like given the way these guys run their podcast and their brand, who they bring on, what they talk about, you're probably a really well filtered, sort of intelligent, but also like DeFi obsessed, interested in this kind of stuff. If you've made it this long through this episode, and you made it through my first episode, I feel like that's a given. Because there's like, I don't think anyone I know in real life would be able to make it past like 5 minutes. So you're already clearly interested in this stuff. Even if you don't immediately have plans to purchase a note and start participating at the base layer, if you find this interesting, please come into our Discord or just shoot me a DM on X. I feel like at this point, the way that we've built our community, the way we've attracted a kind of certain type of DeFi user and DeFi obsessive has benefited us tremendously and has benefited those who've joined that community and participated. So yeah, my call to action is just, don't necessarily buy kerosene right now. Don't necessarily buy a note. I'm never gonna shill purchasing stuff, but I will very strongly shill, if you are interested in this kind of thing, please join our community. Um, it's really a nice symbiotic thing where community members benefit, the protocol benefits, I benefit because I spend 20 hours a day on this, and interacting with cool, intelligent people is what makes it ultimately all worth it at this stage. Taking over the financial system and making life better for people who interact with it, which is pretty much everybody, will make it worth it in the much later stages. But right now, that kind of person to person contact that we have with the community and the ability to recruit people from that community and get good ideas is amazing. So yeah, my call to action to anybody listening, just at 0xDYAD on X, link to our Discord there. I very much look forward to hearing from you.
Well said. Yeah. No, definitely reach out, guys. I think there's a lot of value and fun and relationships to be had just by speaking up, and it's a strong message that not enough people give out, I think. Cool, man. Well, if somebody doesn't stop us, we'll be here all day. So, Joey, thanks again, man.
Yeah,
This
hey,
was a lot of fun.
definitely. Thanks for
Um,
having me, guys.
Definitely looking forward to seeing you guys grow, seeing this new stuff come out. And yeah, that was episode 88. Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Thanks, guys.